The Extreme Right by the Southern Avenger. When abortion doctor George Tiller was murdered by pro-life activist Scott Roeder and neo-Nazi James von Brunn shot and killed a security guard at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., according to liberal pundits, such acts of right-wing violence were not just isolated incidents, but inspired and even encouraged by the broader conservative movement. Citing Bill O'Reilly, Fox News, Glenn Beck, Rush Limbaugh, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, and even the Republican Party, liberal New York Times columnist Paul Krugman wrote, quote, "Respectable news organizations and political figures are giving aid and comfort to dangerous extremism. It's a threat to take seriously. Yes, the worst terrorist attack in our history was perpetrated by a foreign conspiracy, but the second worst, the Oklahoma City bombing, was perpetrated by an all-American lunatic. Politicians and media organizations wind up such people at their and our peril." According to liberals like Krugman, irresponsible rhetoric by conservatives is what wound up vicious murderers like Roeder, Brunn, and even Timothy McVeigh. The extent to which conservative views influence the minds of such men is speculative. It's also completely irrelevant. Many people have long argued that pornography leads to rape, fast food encourages obesity, and I learned as a kid that the quickest path to Satan worship was to listen to heavy metal music. Sure enough, convicted rapists are often discovered to have a large stash of dirty movies. Many overweight folks do have an affection for Big Macs, and there were a number of cases in the 1980s where devil-worshipping teenagers who committed violent or even murderous acts were also, not so coincidentally, big Ozzy Osbourne fans. But healthy, normal people do not indulge in pornography to the extent that it drives them to violent sexual madness. They do not wreck their health with a steady diet of cheeseburgers and do not take seriously the ramblings of a silly heavy metal singer. Healthy, normal people recognize proper context and maintain a realistic perspective. Roeder and Brunn are not healthy, normal people. They are fanatics, unable to recognize proper context and completely detached from reality. Conservative Russell Kirk once observed that the definition of a fanatic is one who seizes upon a slice of truth or perceived truth and harps on it incessantly. Roeder and Brunn had their own personal truths and harped on them in their own minds until it drove them to ideological madness, compelling them to commit murder. The right-wing ideological paths that led Roeder and Brunn to murder could have just as easily began on the left. Whereas fanatical environmentalists or animal rights activists, they could have spiked trees to kill loggers or shot scientists down in cold blood for their cause. Yet no one believes environmentalists or animal rights advocates, even the most strident, are being irresponsible and advocating for their respective beliefs. Krugman and other liberals' suggestion that conservatives who dissent from the prevailing orthodoxy, even extreme dissenters, are being irresponsible with their rhetoric, are they themselves being irresponsible, not to mention undemocratic and downright un-American. In the U.S. today, we are living through one of the most drastic expansions of state power in this nation's history. The last thing the American right needs to do is moderate or tone down its message to avoid encouraging the random crackpots who will always be in our midst regardless of who's in the White House or what party is in power. In fact, the best way to stop future Roeders or Brunns from doing any damage would be to allow an armed populace free of strict gun control who might fire back at such maniacs. An extreme conservative position in and of itself. I find it quite amusing that liberals find the language on talk radio and even by GOP leaders too extreme, considering that it was the milquetoast Republican right of the Bush era that led to the current stimulus spending bonanza that men like Krugman love so much, and talk radio spent the last election corralling grassroots conservatives into voting for John McCain, a man whose lifelong political career doesn't indicate that he would have governed much different from Obama. Basic mathematics tells us that the radical expansion of the state will require radical opposition to it, and to date, the so-called extreme right we keep hearing about hasn't materialized to meet this challenge. We can only hope this changes, and soon. And telling conservatives to quit talking conservative, telling libertarians to quit talking libertarian, and telling any other patriotic American dissenter to shut up, simply to avoid another Roeder or Brunn, would be like telling Jodie Foster to quit acting as to not inspire another John Hinckley. It doesn't make any sense. And to stop the extreme growth of government, America will require not a conservatism deemed respectable by liberals like Paul Krugman, but an extreme right worthy of its name.